Hey everyone, we have a relatively compact lecture this week for a couple of reasons. First, I've asked you to watch this documentary, 1992's War Room, about the Bill Clinton campaign. And secondly, we're going to be spending a lot of time about the 1980 election from here on, really, in the course. Even though we'll cover others in lecture, your book reading for this week and throughout the rest of the semester is from Reagan's Victory. I've asked you to read the first several chapters of that book for roughly this week so that you can finish in due time by the end of the semester. And so we'll be spending a lot of time on the 1980 election, both in lectures and in readings. And so this lecture is really just about one little tiny facet of the 80 election. In fact, I'm going to be spending more time talking about the relationship between Reagan's rhetorical education in the 1950s than in any specific parts of the 1980 election today. But we do spend, in general, a lot of time on the 1980 election because I think it's pivotal, seminal moment in modern American politics. It's hard to understand the story, the bigger bird's eye view story of American politics in the modern era since 1960 without understanding all of the events that coalesced in the 1980 election. There's two reasons for this. One, the 1980 election, Reagan's and the conservatives' victory, mirrors the rightward drift of the country. More and more people are beginning to self-identify as conservative rather than liberal, starting in the mid-70s and then increasing up until the present. And then second, it mirrors, the 1980 election mirrors the changing of the guard in both the Republican Party, with the party becoming more and more conservative, and a changing of the guard in the Democratic Party, with the party becoming more and more conservative as well. And so a candidate that is lauded as or angrily called liberal in 1992, Bill Clinton, as we've seen, is running as far away from the old images of 1972 McGovern, 1968 and 1984's Mondale, 1968's RFK, Eugene McCarthy, etc. These candidates who were for sure more ideologically liberal and presented themselves as such, that word had become such bad news for candidates that new Democrats like Clinton were running it fast and far from that term, whereas conservatism was the new term of art. It had a power and a gravitas that liberalism just didn't anymore. So that's why we spend time on the 1980 election. What I want to do today in today's brief lecture is spend time on from 1953 to 1962 and ask the question of what does Ronald Reagan's hosting of a program called the General Electric Theater, Sunday nights at 9 on NBC, have to do with the 1980 election? And I'd say it has two things. First is that Reagan honed his ideological presentation of conservatism, specifically capitalism, free market capitalism, while he was employed by General Electric, both to host that program and speak on numerous occasions around the country. And then second, independently of his employment with General Electric, Reagan went to what he calls a graduate school, an informal graduate school, for his political education as he had transferred and converted from being what he called a New Deal Democrat to being a true-blooded conservative in the 1950s and early 1960s. So to the first argument, Reagan honed his ideological presentation of capitalism while being employed by General Electric. So this TV show is kind of a peculiar TV show that he hosted Sunday nights at 9, the General Electric Theater. In general, the show was just a series of actors coming on and re-performing smaller versions of either plays or popular films, or some would even recite poetry. It was kind of an anthology. But Reagan would host it, and as you'll see in a video later in the Prezi, he makes these kind of brief asides that are political asides about the nature of big government or how regulations can stifle innovation, that they have this kind of ideological flavor. They're not long speeches, and they don't interrupt from the entertaining content of the program, but they're unmistakably there. And General Electric sponsors the entire thing, so they can theoretically say whatever they would like to. And so this is part of General Electric's vision to mix its politics, its kind of version of free market economics, its conservatism or libertarianism, if you will, with its product. And so their slogans at the time talk about American progress, by which they meant America is progressing out of the New Deal heavy regulations on corporations age, but also America is progressing technologically with more and more freedoms introduced by the technologies that GE was producing, let's say, around the house, in the kitchen, in the garage, in the car, everywhere else in American life. And so its progress was a political idea, but also it was a commercial idea. So Reagan would mirror that on this program, but he also, as part of his contract, would visit dozens of GE plants and development facilities per year, and he would speak at education seminars for executives. He would speak at hostile union rallies where they were very much pro-unionization, pro-regulation, pro-workers' rights, and Reagan would have to kind of go to debate school, speaking, giving hundreds of speeches per year, and figuring out answers to questions, even friendly questions like, well, I'm pro-capitalist, but I'm anti-monopolies, and so how do I know that a free market system doesn't inevitably lead to monopolies? Reagan would have to figure out a good answer to that question before a live audience. Let's say a hostile union member asks him, well, doesn't free market capitalism just destroy workers' rights and give all economic power to big companies? Reagan would have to figure out a good answer to that question, and he did this for 8 years, not just at 10 speeches per day when he would visit GE factories and development facilities, but also when he was in these areas. Let's say he was in Naperville, Illinois, at a GE plant. He would also go to their Rotary Club and give the same speech. He would also go to a Freemasonry guild and give that speech. He would go to any other citizen group that would have him. He would go there. The second thing is during the same period he's going to school, kind of graduate school, the rhetorical education of graduate school for Ronald Reagan is enriched by a series of books that are being written by an upstart conservative intellectual movement in the United States. Books like Whittaker Chambers' Witness, written in 1951, or God and Man at Yale, written by the famous conservative William F. Buckley in 1952, or Buckley's Up from Liberalism in 1959, or 1948's Ideas Have Consequences by Richard Weaver, famously The Conservative Mind, this kind of doorstop of a book, 500, 600 pages, by Russell Kirk in 1952. In other words, there's lots and lots and lots of newly conservative books making waves. These writers are also writing, along with many others, for new conservative magazines, most famously National Review, which is being published from 1955 onward, and Reagan is reading these. He's taking notes. You can even see in the Reagan Library in California where he's got these books and he's dog-eared them and he's double highlighted them and he's circled words and he's obviously taking these words to heart, and then he's not only just believing these ideas, but he's learning how to perform these ideas in front of lots of different audiences to make them sellable. And so if you look at 1964, when Barry Goldwater, influenced by these same ideas, is demolished by Lyndon Baines Johnson, tainted by Kennedy's death, but still at the same time Goldwater didn't give a very good presentation of conservatism in that election. Virtually the same platform, much of the same ideas, but almost none of the same language is used by Reagan in his 1980 election, which is the exact opposite. A landslide against an incumbent president, Jimmy Carter, with a platform that looks almost identical to the one that Goldwater was demolished with just 16 years prior. And I think that what we can see is, and I'll go through this a bit more in the upcoming slides, but what we can see is that Reagan used this period after he had been a professional actor and as he was transitioning into be the governor of California starting in 1966, but this pivotal rhetorical education where he learned how to hone his ideological presentation of conservatism and also enrich that ideological presentation with what he called his informal graduate school, was vital to understanding how Goldwater could be demolished in 1964, and just 16 years later, Reagan could cement the conservative ascendancy.